Welcome to episode 5 in our series on Judaism and animal welfare. And in the last episode we examined scriptural sources regarding compassion for animals. This episode we're going to concentrate on Talmudic or rabbinic enactions and quotations regarding compassion for animals and various other topics. So just want to quickly refer to the ex-chief rabbi of the then British Empire from the early 20th century, Rabbi Joseph Herman Hertz. You may have seen his Chumash, Pentateuch, in your synagogue. He said, and I quote, "In the Talmud, kindness to animals becomes the basis of a whole code of laws." And also I'm going to quote Joseph Morris, who was a biblical commentator at a very similar time in the first half of the 20th century, and his very accurate observation regarding the Talmudic era and why is it that these enactions for compassion for animals were very relevant at the time. So he observes, and I quote, "This sympathy for the dumb animals is all the more remarkable because of the terrible scenes in the Roman arena, which are only too clear an indication of the inhumanity which prevailed in the civilized world during the Talmudic period." So it's very true. We know that the kind of colosseums and the similar types of arenas where they used to use animals and used to terrorize both humans and animals in these ghastly arenas were running alongside the Talmudic period. So of course there was going to be this kind of reaction to what was going on by other nations at that time. So we learn in Gemara Shabbos 77 Amud Beis that we have to appreciate even the smallest and lowliest of all creatures, even insects that are sometimes considered pests, but are strictly speaking part of God's plan and part of God's holistic universe and planet. So I'm going to quote from Shabbos 77b. "You think that flies, fleas, mosquitoes are superfluous, but they have their purpose in creation as a means of a final outcome. Of all that the Holy One, blessed be He, created in His world, He did not create a single thing without a purpose." And we are also taught in Eruvin 100 Amud Beis the characteristics, if we can imitate characteristics of animals, that they can teach us a lot and we can gain some positive attributes from their characteristics. And so Eruvin 100b describes how we can emulate the honesty from an ant, which doesn't steal the stores of other ants. You learn decency from the cat, which covers its excrement. We can learn manners from the cock, which courts the hen by promises and duly apologizing when he is not able to fulfill them. Cheerfulness from the grasshopper, which sings although it knows it is fated to die. Piety from the stork, which guards the purity of its family and is kind to its fellows. And chastity from the dove. That's from Eruvin 100b. And another passage interprets the cry of each animal as representing all of them being engaged in a constant song of praise to God. I think this is referring to Nishmas Kol Chai Tovrech Et Shimcha. The soul of all living things calls your praise, referring to God. And perhaps when we hear birds singing, perhaps this is what they are actually doing. They're actually praising God. Some other references in the Gemara, in Bezo 32b, and I quote, "Whoever is merciful to all creatures is a descendant of our ancestor Abraham." The Talmud also tells us in Shabbos 151b that heaven rewards the person who has concern and compassion for the rest of creation. But this assurance of reward is not the major moral thrust of Jewish teaching. Our tradition emphasizes that Jews are commanded to do what is moral, but not just for the sake of reward. That's from Pirkei Avos, chapter 1, Mishnah 3. Also, let's talk about domestic animals, our pets. We've been talking about the cow in the field, perhaps the sheep, and other, but we don't. We must remember also that our pets are also our absolute responsibility. We take them in, and we have to be responsible for every part of their life. We know that the beautiful law that is quoted in Gittin 64, that a person must provide for his animals before he or she eats or drinks. This is based on partly Devarim chapter 11, verse 13, in which God promises the Bnei Israel that if they, and I quote, "hearken diligently unto my commandments, I will give grass in thy fields for thy cattle, and thou shalt eat and be satisfied." So take note of the order of God's words, to provide grass to the cattle, and then then man should eat and be satisfied. Also, in Yerushalmi Keturot 29a, the Talmud states that one should not have an animal unless one can properly feed and care for it. Another teaching tells us in Sefer Chasidim, which is a medieval book on piety, it quotes, "A good man does not sell his beast to a cruel person." Also from Baba Metzia 32b, we are reminded that we are required to help animals that don't belong to us, including those of an enemy. We have a duty to prevent the suffering of any animal, and it's based directly on the biblical text, and so carries a midoraisa obligation. For example, Exodus 23, verse 5, commands that, and I quote, "If you see the ass of him that hateth you lying under its burden, you shall help lift it up." According to also Rabbi Solomon Gansfried in his Code of Jewish Law, I quote, "When horses drawing a cart come to a road, a rough road or a steep hill, and it is hard for them to draw the cart without help, it is our duty to help them, even when they belong to a non-Jew, because of the precept not to be cruel to animals, lest the owner smite them, to force them to draw more than their strength permits." And even relating to horses, back to that the Sefer Chasidim, that 12th century work, that warns us against the use of spurs on horses, which do cause pain and injury to animals. Even though at that time horses were the only means of transportation, Rabbi Yehuda, the Chassid, forbade Jews who rode horses from using spurs. And according to Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg, kind treatment of animals may help to ensure generally the welfare of human society. And I'm going to quote him now. He says, "The essential thrust of these teachings is that animals, even the most powerful among them, are ultimately helpless before man. We rule their kingdom as God rules ours. the way that we exercise our power over the rest of God's creatures, over those who ultimately cannot defend themselves against us, must be the way of love and compassion. If it is not, then we ourselves have made the choice that the strong can do what they like to other living beings and to each other. If such policies prevail, the world will soon be destroyed by us. So fantastic words from Rabbi Arthur Herzberg. Let's take a look now at the concept of blood sports or hunting, which we know was severely condemned by rabbinic sages at the time of the Gemara. We know that in Avodah Zarah it is stated, whoever sits in the stadium as a spectator himself spills blood. We must remember at the time that these enactments were formulated, in the days of the Roman Empire, the masses were entertained in colosseums, and there were gladiatorial contests between man and animal where they fought to the death. This must have been a ghastly time and a ghastly viewing. Also hunting, a very kind of unethical pastime, was very strongly disapproved of by Rambam or Maimonides, and he wrote that, and I quote, "Those who go to hunt animals and kill birds violate the commandment that forbids us to wantonly destroy God's creation." Also Rabbi Akiva also condemned this type of killing of wild animals. He said, Rabbi Akiva ruled that it was forbidden to kill a wild animal unless it was given a fair trial, like a human being, before a court of 23 judges. And we know this wasn't supposed to be taken literally, but it was only supposed to demonstrate the sanctity, the Jewish view of sanctity of all God's creatures. The 18th century scholar in Austria, Rabbi Ezekiel Landau, described the concept of sport hunting and its relation to Judaism. He said, in the Torah, the sport of hunting is imputed only to fierce characters like Nimrod and Esau, never to any of the patriarchs and their descendants. I cannot comprehend how a Jew could even dream of killing animals merely for the pleasure of hunting. When the act of killing is prompted by that of sport, it is downright cruelty. So that speaks for itself. And to perhaps change the subject a little bit, let's talk about how we are obliged to act kindly to farm animals. We know that one of the most important Jewish laws dealing with animals requires that they can rest on Shabbos, as it is ordained in Ten Commandments and Exodus and Deuteronomy. There's a full chapter regarding in the Talmud, in the Shulchan Aruch. Orach Chaim, chapter 305, discusses the prohibitions against working animals on Shabbos. And our ex-chief rabbi, Rabbi Hertz, notes, care and kindness to cattle are of such profound importance for the humanizing of man that this duty has its place in the 10 Commandments. The rabbis classed cruelty to animals amongst the most serious of offences. So we know that we are not allowed to plough together two different species of animal, because it might cause the weaker animal to be overworked or suffer. We'll see this from Devarim chapter 22. According to the Talmud, in Yoredeah 297b, and I quote, "You may not allow one task to be done together by animals of two species. You may not allow them to carry the smallest thing together, even if it only be a seed. You may not sit in a wagon drawn by animals of differing species." And moving on to another subject, to conclude this episode, we know that regarding the compassion for animals specifically, in Vayikra chapter 22 verses 27 to 28, it states that it is forbidden to kill a newborn goat, sheep or ox until it has had at least 7 days of warmth and nourishment from its mother. And I quote what it says in Vayikra: "You shall not kill it and its young both in 1 day." Rambam, Maimonides' great scholar, has commented on this passage, and I'm going to quote him now. "It is prohibited to kill an animal with its young on the same day, in order that people should be restrained and prevented from killing the two together in such a manner that the young is slain in sight of the mother. For the pain of animals under such circumstances is very great. There is no difference in this case between the pain of man and the pain of other living beings." And more recently, in 1988, the late Rabbi Moshe Feinstein issued an authoritative response stating categorically that Jewish law forbids the raising of animals under inhumane conditions to produce veal, white veal. We know that veal calves are kept in extraordinary bad conditions in small crates, deprived of nourishment, and generally suffer their short lives. And on another unfortunate delicacy, they can call it a delicacy, the idea of foie gras, pâté de foie gras, where geese are stuffed, force-fed grain in order to overfatten their liver. Normally they die very quickly and very horrific deaths, and these sort of things should not be considered kosher. I'm sorry if it offends anybody who listens, but I'm not sorry. I think these actions are wholly un-Jewish, and for anybody to consider, number one, for them to be kosher is a joke, and number two, to be considered a God-fearing Jew and use these products as like a luxury product, it almost boggles the mind. But that's my opinion. So that's the end of this episode, and I look forward to the next episode where we're going to discuss Rav Kook and his view on vegetarianism and compassion to animals.